The chipped paint on the window frame was a constant reminder. To Alex Carter, it wasn't just a sign of a neglected property, it was a tally mark. Another small indignity in a life that had become a quiet battle for simple peace. Every morning, the sun would slant through that very window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and falling across the sleeping face of his daughter, Lily. That sight was the only thing that mattered. It was the fuel that kept him going, the reason he sanded splintered furniture until his knuckles were raw and fixed engines, until the grease was permanently etched into the lines of his palms. Lily was 7, a whirlwind of bright ribbons and missing teeth, and this little house with its sagging porch and a yard just big enough for a swing set was the only home she'd ever known. It was their fortress after her mother, Clara, had been taken from them by a sickness that had moved with the ruthless efficiency of a military campaign. Alex, a man who had once navigated the treacherous terrains of foreign lands as an army ranger, now found his most challenging mission was navigating the minefield of single fatherhood on a shoestring budget. The notices started appearing 3 months ago. Tucked into the screen door, the crisp, cream-colored envelopes felt like an invasion. They spoke in a language of cold legalities: redevelopment, termination of lease, vacate the premises. The name at the bottom was always the same: Gerald Sterling, CEO of Sterling Properties, Inc. Alex had never met the man, but he pictured him as a faceless entity in a high-rise tower, moving lives around on a spreadsheet like chess pieces. Alex had always paid his rent on time. He'd called the property management number, leaving polite messages that were never returned. He explained his situation, his long-term tenancy, his daughter's attachment to the home. He was met with a wall of silence. The letters just became more frequent, their tone shifting from formal to demanding. This morning, another one had arrived, this time by certified mail. It sat on the small kitchen table, a stark white rectangle beside Lily's half-eaten bowl of cereal. Alex stared at it, his jaw tight. He could feel the familiar coil of anger tightening in his gut, a feeling he'd learned to suppress long ago. In his old life, anger was a tool, a sharp edge to be honed and directed. Now it was a liability, a beast to be caged lest it frighten his daughter. "Daddy, can we go to the park after school?" Lily asked, her voice pulling him back from the edge. She was standing by the door, her unicorn backpack slung over one shoulder. He forced a smile, the muscles in his face feeling stiff. "You bet, sweet pea. We'll swing so high you can touch the clouds." Her grin was a sunrise, chasing away the shadows in the room. He knelt, adjusted her backpack, and tucked a stray strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Have a good day. Be good for Mrs. Davison." "I will. Love you, Daddy." "Love you more, Lilybug." He watched her skip down the cracked sidewalk to the bus stop, a small, brave figure in a world that felt increasingly hostile. Only when the big yellow bus had swallowed her up and rumbled away did he allow his smile to fall. He picked up the envelope. His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he tore it open. The words were brutal and final. He had 30 days. After that, his belongings would be forcibly removed. A cold rage, different from the hot flash of anger, settled deep in his bones. This wasn't about a spreadsheet anymore. This was a direct threat to his daughter's world. He spent the day working in his garage, the rhythmic scrape of sandpaper on wood, a poor substitute for the control he craved. He tried to focus on the grain of the oak, the smooth finish under his fingertips, but his mind kept replaying the cold, printed words. Later that afternoon, a sleek black sedan, a Mercedes so polished it seemed to suck the light out of the air around it, purred to a stop in front of his house. A man in a tailored suit, with silver hair and a disdainful sneer permanently etched onto his face, emerged from the driver's side. He adjusted his silk tie, a slash of crimson against a crisp white shirt, and surveyed Alex's small home as if it were a piece of filth on his expensive shoe. Alex stepped out of the garage, wiping his hands on a rag. He knew instantly who this was: Gerald Sterling. The man's eyes, the color of a winter sky, swept over Alex's work-stained jeans and faded t-shirt with open contempt. "Carter?" Sterling's voice was as smooth and cold as Riverstone. "That's me," Alex said, his own voice low and even. "I am Gerald Sterling. I trust you received my latest correspondence." He didn't offer a hand, just stood there, an invading king on a pauper's land. "I got it," Alex said. "There's got to be a way to work something out, Mr. Sterling. I've lived here for 10 years. My daughter—" Sterling cut him off with a flick of his wrist. "Your personal circumstances are of no consequence to me, Carter. This property is a blight on a rapidly appreciating neighborhood. I have plans for it, profitable plans. You are an obstacle to be removed. The letter is quite clear. 30 days. "This is her home," Alex said, the words feeling inadequate against the man's polished indifference. Sterling actually laughed, a short, barking sound devoid of any humor. "A home? This shack? Please, I'm doing you and your child a favor. You'll be forced to find somewhere more suitable." He glanced at the swing set, a faint smile of disgust touching his lips. "Consider it a push towards upward mobility." The condescension was a physical thing, pressing in on Alex. He thought of Lily's laughter as she pumped her legs on that swing. He thought of the chalk drawings of castles and dragons that covered the sidewalk, washed away by the rain and drawn anew each week. This man saw none of that. He saw only blight, an obstacle, a number that didn't add up. "I'm asking you man to man," Alex said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "to give me more time. Just until the school year ends. It would be hard on my kid to move right now." Sterling's eyes narrowed. "I am not your man, Carter. We are not equals. You are a tenant. I am the owner. The dynamic is simple. You will comply or you will be compelled to. Now, if you'll excuse me, I find the air in this part of town rather stagnant." He turned to leave, his dismissal as absolute as a judge's gavel. Alex stood there, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, the smell of sawdust and helplessness filling his lungs. He watched the black car disappear down the street, leaving a trail of quiet menace in its wake. The battle was no longer distant and faceless. It had a name, a sneer, and a crimson silk tie. And it had just declared war on his front lawn. The next 2 weeks were a special kind of hell. Alex spent his evenings scouring online listings for apartments, his heart sinking with each click. The rents were astronomical, demanding deposits and credit scores he simply didn't have. Every affordable option was in a neighborhood he wouldn't feel safe letting Lily walk home in. He tried to shield her from his anxiety, plastering on a brave face, but children are barometers of the soul. Lily grew quiet, her boisterous energy replaced by a watchful stillness. She'd stopped asking to go to the park, as if sensing that their small world was shrinking. One evening, seeking a brief respite, he took her to their favorite spot, a small family-run diner called the Corner Booth. The air inside was warm and thick, with the comforting smells of frying bacon and coffee. A waitress named Sarah bustled over, her smile genuine. She had kind eyes and always slipped Lily an extra cherry for her milkshake. "The usual, Alex?" she asked, already grabbing 2 menus. "You know it, Sarah. Thanks." Sarah had been a quiet fixture in their lives for years. She'd seen Lily grow from a toddler in a high chair to a little girl who could read the entire dessert menu by herself. She'd seen the grief in Alex's eyes after Clara passed and had always treated him with a gentle, unspoken understanding. As Lily happily slurped her chocolate milkshake, Sarah leaned in closer to Alex. "You okay? You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." Alex managed a weak smile. "Just some landlord trouble." "The new guy, Sterling?" Sarah's expression soured. "Heard he's a real piece of work, bought up half the block. Old Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down was in here crying last week. He's tripling her rent." The news landed like a stone in Alex's gut. It wasn't just him. Sterling was carving a path of destruction through the entire community. "He's evicting me," Alex admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Gave me 30 days. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Alex, no. With Lily, where will you go?" "That's the million-dollar question," he said, trying to keep his voice light for his daughter's sake. "Well, if you need anything," she said, her voice fierce with sincerity, "a place to store boxes, someone to watch Lily while you look for places, you just say the word. We look out for our own around here." Her kindness was a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness. It reminded him of another time, another family, a brotherhood forged not by blood, but by fire and shared hardship. He pushed the thought away. That was a lifetime ago. He was just Alex Carter now, a carpenter, a dad. That other man was buried deep. The encounter with Sterling had changed something in the air. The threat was no longer a piece of paper, it was a physical presence. Twice, Alex saw the same black Mercedes driving slowly past his house, not stopping, just observing. It was a power play, a reminder of who was in charge. He started triple-checking the locks at night, his old instincts flaring to life. He felt like he was back on patrol, a low-grade hum of vigilance constantly thrumming beneath his skin. He made a call he hadn't made in over a year. The phone rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Davies." "Sarge, it's Carter." There was a pause, then the voice warmed considerably. "Alex, good to hear from you, son. How are you? How's the little one?" Master Sergeant Davies had been his team leader, a man who could command respect with a single glance and who had pulled Alex out of more than one firefight. He was retired now, running a security consulting firm a few states over. "We're good, Sarge. Lily's great. Listen, this is a strange question, but do you still have contacts? People who can find things out about people?" The line was quiet for a moment. Davies's voice, when it returned, had lost its warmth and was replaced by professional steel. "What kind of trouble are you in, Alex?" "It's not that kind of trouble. Not yet, anyway. Just a landlord. A bully with deep pockets trying to throw me and my kid out on the street. His name is Gerald Sterling." "Spell it for me," Davies said. Alex did. "I'll make some calls," Davies said. "You know the rule, Alex. You need us, you call. Doesn't matter if it's been a day or a decade. We're still a fire team. You got that?" "Got it, Sarge," Alex said, a profound sense of relief washing over him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just stay safe and keep your head on a swivel." The conversation settled something in him. He wasn't entirely alone. But as the days ticked by, the pressure mounted. The for sale signs on neighboring lawns were replaced by sold signs, then by the menacing logos of Sterling Properties, Inc. His small island of a home was being surrounded. The day it all came to a head was a Tuesday. It was unseasonably hot, the air thick and heavy. Lily was in the backyard, trying to teach their scruffy terrier mix, Buster, how to roll over. Her laughter, usually a sound that filled Alex with joy, now carried a fragile, bittersweet edge. Each peal felt like it could be the last one he heard in this yard. He was in the garage trying to finish a custom-built bookshelf for a client when the black Mercedes pulled up again. This time, Sterling didn't just get out. He strode onto the lawn as if he already owned it. A sheaf of papers in his hand. "Carter," he boomed, his voice startling Lily, who immediately ran to Alex's side, her small hand gripping his jeans. Alex stepped out, placing a protective hand on Lily's shoulder. "Sterling, you're trespassing." "Not for long," Sterling sneered, waving the papers. "This is a formal notice of accelerated eviction filed with the court this morning. It seems you've been uncooperative. I had my lawyers note your unwillingness to communicate, which gives me certain legal advantages." "I tried to communicate," Alex said through gritted teeth. "You ignored me." "Details, details," Sterling said, his gaze flicking around the yard with theatrical disgust. He looked at the slightly overgrown flower beds Clara had planted years ago. He looked at the faded plastic slide and the swing set with its peeling red paint. His lip curled. "Honestly, I'll be doing the world a service when I bulldoze this entire pathetic excuse for a home." Lily flinched at his words, pressing herself tighter against Alex's leg. That was it. The beast in the cage rattled its bars. "You need to leave," Alex said, his voice dangerously low. "Now." Sterling seemed to relish the confrontation. He took another step forward, invading their personal space. He was taller than Alex, but softer, with the pampered look of a man whose only battles were fought in boardrooms. "Or what, Carter? You'll what? Fix a wobbly chair at me?" He chuckled. "You people are all the same. You think your sentimental attachments mean anything in the real world. They don't. Money means something. Power means something. This," he said, gesturing to the house, the yard, to Lily, "this means nothing." He took a deep, deliberate breath, and then he did it. He turned his head and spat. A thick, contemptuous glob of saliva landed on the grass, just inches from the leg of Lily's swing set. The world went silent for Alex. The sound of the birds, the distant traffic, Lily's hitched breath, it all faded away. The air crackled. The beast was out. He saw not a yard, but a sanctuary. He saw not a patch of grass, but the last piece of earth that connected him to his wife. He saw not a sneering landlord, but an enemy who had just desecrated a holy site right in front of his child. Lily gasped, her small body trembling. That sound was the final trigger. The quiet carpenter vanished. The stoic father disappeared. In his place stood a man forged in the crucible of conflict, a man whose movements were stripped of all hesitation. Sterling was still smirking, savoring his act of ultimate disrespect, when Alex moved. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. His movements were fluid, economical, and terrifyingly fast. He closed the distance in a single step. His left hand shot out and clamped onto the crimson silk tie. His right hand came up, not to punch, but to brace against Sterling's chest, using the man's own momentum against him. Sterling's eyes widened in shock, the smirk wiped from his face, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then fear. He choked as the knot of the tie dug into his windpipe. What are you doing? Get your filthy hands off me." Alex said nothing. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes like chips of flint. He tightened his grip, the expensive fabric bunching in his fist, and began to pull. Sterling, a man accustomed to absolute control, found himself utterly powerless, being dragged across the lawn he had just defiled. He stumbled, his polished Italian shoes scuffing on the grass, his arms flailing uselessly. "Let go of me. I'll have you arrested. I'll sue you for everything you have," he gasped, his voice a pathetic squeak. Alex didn't even seem to hear him. He was a force of nature, his purpose singular and absolute. He dragged the sputtering, terrified man, not towards the street, not towards the house, but towards the tall, weathered wooden fence that separated his backyard from the overgrown alley behind it. Lily watched, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe, as her father, her quiet, gentle father, towed the loud, cruel man like a broken toy. The fence was old, the wood greyed by sun and rain. A simple iron latch held the gate closed. To Sterling it was just the shabby boundary of a worthless property. To Alex it was a threshold. With his free hand he reached out, his movements never faltering, and lifted the latch. The gate creaked open, revealing the dusty, sun-baked alley beyond. Sterling's panic escalated into pure terror. His mind, accustomed to predictable scenarios of legal threats and financial leverage, couldn't process this raw, physical reality. "What are you doing? Are you insane? You can't do this," he wheezed, clawing at Alex's unyielding fist. Alex didn't respond. He simply kept pulling, dragging Sterling through the gateway and into the alley. The sudden change in light from the dappled sun of the yard to the harsh glare of the open alley was disorienting. Sterling stumbled again, nearly falling to his knees, and then he saw them. They weren't standing in formation, they weren't in uniform, but there was no mistaking what they were. Leaning against a nondescript panel van and a dusty pickup truck were about a dozen men. They were of various ages and builds, dressed in jeans, work boots, and faded shirts. Some wore leather vests with patches that meant nothing to Sterling, but everything to Alex. They had the quiet, watchful stillness of men who were comfortable with violence but preferred not to use it. Their arms were crossed, their expressions unreadable, their collective gaze fixed on the man being held by the tie. One man stepped forward. He was older, with a crew cut of iron-grey hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. His eyes, a piercing blue, held a calm authority that made Sterling's own manufactured power feel like a child's fantasy. This was Master Sergeant Davies. "Having some trouble, Alex?" Davies asked, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in Sterling's bones. Alex finally spoke, his voice still dangerously quiet. "Just taking out the trash, Sarge." He gave the tie a sharp tug, bringing Sterling's face uncomfortably close to his own. "This is Gerald Sterling. He's the one I told you about." Davies's eyes swept over Sterling, a slow, meticulous appraisal that missed nothing. The sweat beading on his forehead, the terror in his eyes, the pathetic way he still tried to cling to some semblance of dignity. "Mr. Sterling," Davies said, his tone deceptively mild, We need to have a conversation about respect. Sterling, his bravado completely shattered, could only stammer. Who are you people? I'm calling the police. A large, heavily bearded man leaning against the van chuckled. The sound was not reassuring. Go ahead, the man known to his brothers as Bear grunted. Tell them a real estate developer was invited to a community meeting. This isn't a community meeting. This is assault. This is kidnapping. Sterling shrieked, his voice cracking. No, Davies corrected him calmly. Assault is what you do to widows and families, using paper and lawyers as your weapon. What this is an intervention. He took another step closer, and the other men seemed to subtly shift, forming a loose, inescapable semicircle. You see, Mr. Sterling, you've made a very common mistake. You looked at Alex Carter, you saw a simple carpenter, a quiet single dad, and you thought he was weak. You thought you could push him around, disrespect his home, and threaten his child. Davies paused, letting the words hang in the hot, still air. What you failed to understand is that you weren't just picking a fight with one man. You were picking a fight with the 2nd Ranger Battalion. Or what's left of it, anyway. He gestured to the men around him. This is Bear. He carried a wounded man, 2 clicks under heavy fire. That's Glitch, our tech wizard. He can find out your bank account password faster than you can remember it. Over there is Doc Jensen, who can put a man back together with duct tape and sheer willpower. Every man here has a story, and every single one of them owes his life, in one way or another, to the man whose tie you're currently wearing. Sterling's face had gone from red to a pasty white. He looked from face to face, seeing not just men, but a wall of shared history, a brotherhood of unbreakable bonds. He saw scars, tattoos, and eyes that had seen things he couldn't even imagine in his worst nightmares. The world of contracts and loopholes and financial intimidation had dissolved, replaced by a much older, more primal set of rules. Alex here, Davies continued, his voice dropping even lower, becoming almost conversational, is one of the quietest, most decent men I have ever known. Since he came home, all he has wanted is to raise his daughter in peace and be left alone. It takes a lot to get him to this point. Spitting in his yard, in front of his little girl. Well, son, you found the line. Congratulations. Alex finally released his grip. The sudden release of pressure sent Sterling stumbling backward, where he bumped into the unmoving form of Bear, who steadied him with a hand on his shoulder that felt like a vice. Sterling flinched as if he'd been burned. I don't understand, he stammered, looking at Alex with new, terrified eyes. You're just, a carpenter. On my good days, Alex said, his voice finally returning to normal, though an icy edge remained. But you brought my daughter into it. You threatened her home. You disrespected her mother's memory. There are no good days after that. We've taken the liberty of looking into your business, Mr. Sterling. Glitch spoke up from his spot by the van, holding up a tablet. His fingers danced across the screen. Sterling Properties, Inc. It's quite the empire, built on some creative financing. A lot of shell corporations. Some very interesting zoning variances obtained through some very generous donations to city council members. It would be a real shame if a detailed report of our findings were to be anonymously emailed to the IRS and the State Attorney General's office. Sterling's blood ran cold. This was a threat he understood. This was a language he spoke. But the context was all wrong. This wasn't a negotiation in a boardroom. This was an alley, and these men were not corporate raiders. They were something far more dangerous. What do you want? He whispered, his voice hoarse. Davies stepped forward until he was inches from Sterling's face. The smell of gun oil and old leather seemed to radiate from him. What we want is for you to get in your ridiculous car, drive away, and forget Alex Carter's name. Forget this address. You will rescind the eviction notice. You will send him a new 30-year lease at his current rate, effective immediately. You will never, ever come within 1,000 yards of him or his daughter again. And just so we're clear, he added, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, we are not asking. The finality of the statement hung in the air. There was no room for negotiation. There was no appeal. It was an order, delivered with the absolute certainty of men who were used to having their orders followed. Alex just stood there watching. He hadn't needed to say a word. His brothers had said it all for him. He had simply opened the gate, and the family he had fought for, bled for, and grieved for had been standing right there, ready to fight for him. Sterling, trembling, could only nod, his eyes darting around the circle of implacable faces. He was a shark who had found himself in a tank with a pod of killer whales. All his teeth, all his aggression, were useless. "Good," Davies said, stepping back. He nodded to Bear, who released Sterling's shoulder. Sterling didn't wait for a second invitation. He scrambled back through the gate, tripping over his own feet. He ran across the lawn, not even daring to look back. Fumbled with his car door and peeled away from the curb with a squeal of tires, the pristine black Mercedes fleeing like a spooked animal. The alley was quiet again. The men relaxed, the tension draining out of them. Bear clapped Alex on the shoulder, a booming impact that would have staggered a smaller man. "You okay, brother?" he asked. Alex looked at the faces of his friends, his family. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for months. "I am now," he said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face for the first time in a very long time. "I am now." He turned and walked back through the gate, back into his yard, back to his daughter, who was waiting for him on the porch steps. Her expression one of pure, unadulterated pride. The sanctuary was safe. The silence that descended after Sterling's frantic departure was profound. It wasn't an empty silence, but one filled with the unspoken weight of camaraderie and shared relief. The men from the alley filed into the yard, their large frames seeming to shrink the space, yet filling it with a palpable sense of security. They didn't speak of what had just happened. They didn't need to. Instead, they focused on Lily. Bear, the mountain of a man who had terrified Sterling with a single touch, knelt down, his knees popping, until he was at her eye level. "Hey there, soldier. That's a pretty brave face you've got." Lily, who had been watching from the porch, walked over to him, her initial apprehension melting away. "My daddy was braver," she said, her voice small but firm. A low chuckle rumbled through the group. "Yes, he was," Davies agreed, his stern expression softening as he looked at the little girl. "He's always been the bravest one of us." Alex felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. He had spent years compartmentalizing his life, keeping the soldier and the father separate. He thought he had to protect Lily from that part of him, from the hardness and the history it carried. But seeing her now, looking at these men not with fear but with curiosity and a dawning understanding, he realized he had been wrong. This, too, was her family. This was her inheritance. "Who wants ice cream?" Glitch asked, breaking the reverie. He produced a small cooler from the back of the panel van, and soon the yard was filled with the sounds of laughter and spoons scraping against cardboard tubs. These men, who had faced down threats of unimaginable violence, were now debating the merits of chocolate versus strawberry and being thoroughly bossed around by a 7-year-old girl. As the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the lawn, Davies pulled Alex aside. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the street where Sterling had disappeared. Alex nodded. "I know. A guy like that doesn't just walk away. His pride is hurt. He'll retaliate." "Not in the way you think," Davies said. "He's a coward. He won't come back here himself. He'll use the weapons he knows. Lawyers, money, influence. He'll try to dig up dirt, find a weakness, and exploit it." "Let him dig," Alex said with a shrug. "There's nothing to find." "Everyone has something, Alex," Davies said, his expression serious. "We'll stick around for a few days, keep an eye on things. Glitch is already setting up a digital perimeter, monitoring Sterling's communications. But you need to be careful. A cornered rat will chew through anything to escape." The warning lingered long after his friends had departed, promising to return the next day. That night, as Alex tucked Lily into bed, she looked up at him with wide, serious eyes. "Are those men your army, Daddy?" Alex smoothed her hair back from her forehead. "Something like that, sweet pea. They're my brothers. Are they going to protect us from the bad man?" "They are," Alex promised. "We're all going to protect each other." The next week was deceptively quiet. A notarized letter arrived by courier containing a new lease agreement with the terms Davies had dictated, signed by a trembling, almost illegible Gerald Sterling. For a moment, Alex allowed himself to hope that it was truly over. But Davies's words echoed in his mind. He noticed small things. A utility van parked across the street for 2 days straight, leaving without ever performing any work. A man in a cheap suit he saw at the grocery store and then again near Lily's school. It was subtle, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. He was being surveilled. He called Davies. "They're here, professionals." "We see them," came the calm reply. "Glitch has been tracking their handler, a PI firm out of downtown. Sterling's paying them a fortune to find anything he can use against you." The news was unsettling. Alex's life was an open book, but it was his book. The idea of strangers picking through its pages, looking for a sentence to twist, a chapter to misinterpret, felt like a violation more intimate than Sterling's trespassing. A few days later, Alex was at the corner booth for an early breakfast before work. Lily was at a friend's house for a sleepover, and the quiet was a little unnerving. Sarah brought him his coffee, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by a worried frown. "Alex, I need to tell you something," she said, sliding into the booth across from him and lowering her voice. It might be nothing, but it felt weird. "What is it, Sarah?" "Yesterday, 2 guys were in here, suits, not from around here. They were talking about you." Alex felt his spine stiffen. "What did they say?" "They were talking about a background check. One of them said, and I remember this exactly, the guy's a ghost. Clean record, honorable discharge, pays his taxes. Sterling's wasting his money." But then the other one laughed and said, "Doesn't matter. If there's no dirt, you just have to plant some. We just need to find the right pot." Sarah looked at him, her eyes wide with concern. "Alex, what does that mean?" He knew exactly what it meant. If they couldn't find a crime, they would manufacture one. A planted bag of drugs in his truck. A false accusation from a paid witness. An anonymous tip to Child Protective Services. They were coming for the one thing that would destroy him completely, his daughter. The coffee cup felt cold in his hand. The rage he'd felt in the yard was nothing compared to the icy dread that now flooded his veins. This wasn't a fight for a house anymore. This was a fight for his life, for his daughter's future. Sterling wasn't just a bully. He was a monster who would burn a man's whole world down over a bruised ego. He thanked Sarah, his mind already racing, calculating, planning. He left the diner and immediately called Davies. "Sarge, they're changing tactics. They're going to try and frame me. They're going to come after Lily." There was a moment of dead silence on the line. When Davies spoke, all traces of calm were gone, replaced by a voice of pure, cold fury. "That son of a bitch just signed his own death warrant." "No," Alex said quickly. "No, we do this my way. Clean. We can't become him to beat him, but we are going to end this. Tonight." He had a plan. It was risky, and it would mean walking into the lion's den. But Sterling had made a fatal error. He had underestimated not only Alex's friends, but Alex himself. He had assumed Alex's only weapon was his fists. He was about to find out that the most dangerous weapon a ranger ever has is his mind. The plan was audacious, relying on precision timing, flawless execution, and a deep understanding of their enemy's psychology. Sterling was a creature of habit and ego. Every Thursday night, he held a private dinner for his inner circle of investors and political allies at the Pinnacle, an exclusive restaurant on the top floor of the Sterling Tower, the gleaming monument to his own arrogance. It was his throne room, the one place he felt completely untouchable. That was where Alex would strike. Glitch went to work immediately. The Pinnacle's security was state-of-the-art, but as he dryly noted, it was designed to keep criminals out, not to keep a rich guy's secrets in. Within an hour, he had blueprints of the building, security camera loops, and the private elevator codes. Doc Jensen, using his uncanny ability to befriend anyone, managed to get a temporary kitchen job at the restaurant, a man on the inside. Bear and the others would run perimeter security, ensuring no outside interference. The linchpin of the operation, however, came from an unexpected source. Davies's initial deep dive into Sterling's finances had turned up a series of shell corporations linked to a Panamanian bank. It was standard, if shady stuff, but when Glitch, prompted by the new urgency, cross-referenced those corporations with the city's zoning board records, he found it. The smoking gun. Sterling wasn't just gentrifying the neighborhood, he was poisoning it. He had purchased a dozen properties, including Alex's, that sat directly on top of land contaminated by a defunct chemical plant decades ago. The land was worthless, designated as a brownfield site requiring millions in environmental cleanup. But Sterling had bribed a city official, a man who was on his Thursday night dinner list, to rezone the area for residential use without disclosing the contamination reports. His plan was to build cheap condos, sell them fast to unsuspecting families, and then dissolve the shell corporation, leaving the new owners with toxic land and incurable diseases. He wasn't just a predator, he was a purveyor of death. He wasn't just trying to evict you, Alex, Glitch said, his voice grim over the phone. He was planning to build his new luxury condos on land that would have eventually given your daughter cancer. The information hit Alex like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. The spitting, the eviction, the intimidation, it all paled in comparison to this. This was a level of evil he hadn't encountered since the war. And it clarified everything. This was no longer about defense, this was about justice. That evening, Alex transformed. He showered, scrubbing away the last of the sawdust and grease. He opened the long, neglected back of his closet and pulled out the one suit he owned. A simple, dark charcoal wool he had worn to his wife's funeral. It felt strange and foreign on his skin. He looked at himself in the mirror. The man looking back was not the friendly neighborhood carpenter. His eyes were cold and focused. His jaw was set. He was a soldier heading into battle. At precisely 8 p.m., as Sterling was holding court, laughing with his corrupt associates over lobster and champagne, a single elevator began its ascent to the top floor. It bypassed all other stops. Inside stood Alex Carter. He held a simple, slim leather briefcase. He was calm, his pulse was steady, he was breathing slow and deep, just as he had been taught. The elevator doors opened, not into the main restaurant, but into a small private vestibule leading to Sterling's exclusive dining room. 2 large security guards in sharp suits immediately stepped forward, blocking his path. "This is a private event, sir. You'll have to leave." Alex didn't even look at them. He looked past them, through the glass doors, to where Sterling sat at the head of a long table, a smug smile on his face. "My name is Alex Carter," he said, his voice loud enough to carry into the room. "I have a meeting with Mr. Sterling." Heads turned. The laughter in the room died. Sterling's smile vanished, replaced by a look of utter disbelief, which quickly morphed into incandescent rage. He slammed his fork down. "Get him out of here, now!" He snarled at his guards. The guards moved forward, reaching for Alex. They never touched him. From the kitchen doors, Doc Jensen emerged, followed by 2 other men from the team who had also secured jobs for the night. They weren't armed, but they moved with an efficiency that spoke volumes. They simply placed themselves between Alex and the guards. "There's been a change of plan," Doc said pleasantly. At the same time, every screen in the room, the large television displaying stock tickers, the tablets at each place setting, flickered and changed. They now showed a single damning document, the original buried environmental report on the toxicity of the land Sterling was developing. The room erupted in confused murmurs. The investors and the corrupt city official looked at the screens, then at Sterling, their faces paling. Alex walked past the stunned guards and into the room. He moved with a quiet, deliberate confidence that commanded the attention of everyone present. He walked to the head of the table and stood before the man who had tried to ruin his life. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling," Alex said, his voice calm and clear in the suddenly silent room. "I believe you've been looking for some dirt on me. I thought I'd save you the trouble and bring you some of your own." He opened the briefcase and began laying documents on the table, one by one, like a dealer in a high-stakes poker game. "This is the land deed, showing the property's history as a chemical waste site. These are the offshore bank statements, showing the wire transfer to City Councilman Miller." He nodded towards the terrified official, who looked like he was about to faint. "And this," he said, placing a final file on the table, "is a full geological survey and health impact report compiled by a very motivated team of experts. It details the projected cancer rates for any family living on that land for more than 5 years. I believe the term is a pediatric cancer cluster." A collective gasp went through the room. The investors were on their feet, shouting, pointing fingers, their lucrative deal turning into a toxic nightmare before their very eyes. Sterling sat frozen, his face ashen. He was completely and utterly exposed. His kingdom, his tower, was crumbling around him. "You're bluffing," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. "Am I?" Alex asked. He tapped a small button on his phone. Instantly, a dozen cell phones on the table buzzed simultaneously. "That's an email. It contains copies of everything you see here. It has been sent to the spouses of everyone in this room, to the boards of their companies. In 60 seconds, it will be sent to every major news outlet in the city, the state attorney general, and the EPA. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping so only Sterling could hear him. "You came after my daughter. You tried to take her home. You didn't know you were planning to build that home on a foundation of poison. I'm giving you a choice you never gave me. You can let this all go public, and you can spend the rest of your miserable life in a federal prison. Or—" Alex slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a confession, written by Davies's legal team, detailing the bribery, the fraud, the criminal negligence. At the bottom was a second document, an agreement to fund the full multi-million-dollar cleanup of the entire neighborhood and to transfer the deeds of all the homes, free and clear, to their current residents. "You sign," Alex said softly. "You sign it all, you disappear, and you pay for the damage you've done. You give the people you've terrorized their homes back. You make this right." Sterling stared at the papers, then at the hard, unforgiving eyes of the man who had once been just a simple carpenter. He saw no mercy there, only justice. His empire was gone. His power was an illusion. In the end, he was just a man in a suit who had picked a fight with the wrong father. With a trembling hand, Gerald Sterling picked up the pen. The room was silent, the only sound the frantic beating of his own heart and the quiet, steady scratching of ink on paper as he signed his entire world away. The aftermath was both swift and silent. True to his word, Alex never released the information publicly. The threat was enough. Sterling's empire imploded overnight. His investors, facing ruin and potential prosecution, turned on him, their loyalty as flimsy as their ethics. The Pinnacle restaurant was shuttered within a week. The Sterling Tower went into receivership. Gerald Sterling himself vanished, his assets liquidated to fund the massive environmental cleanup and the property transfers he had signed away. He became a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms about the dangers of hubris. For Alex and his neighbors, the change was seismic. One by one, they received official deeds to their homes in the mail, sent by a consortium of lawyers. There were no fanfares, no press conferences, just the quiet, profound relief of security. The fear that had hung over the neighborhood like a toxic cloud dissipated, replaced by a sense of bewildered gratitude. Old Mrs. Gable baked a dozen pies and delivered them to every house on the block. People started tending their gardens again. The sound of children's laughter seemed to grow louder. Alex's yard, the small patch of land that had been the battlefield, became a place of celebration. He hosted a barbecue, and the entire neighborhood came, bringing covered dishes and folding chairs. His brothers were there, of course. Davies manned the grill, Bear organized a three-legged race for the kids, and Glitch sat on the porch steps, quietly showing Lily how to code a simple game on his laptop. Sarah from the diner was there too. She had brought a mountain of her famous potato salad. She and Alex found themselves standing near the old swing set, watching the happy chaos unfold. "You did it, Alex," she said, her voice soft with admiration. "You saved everyone." He shook his head, looking over at Davies, who was expertly flipping burgers. "I didn't do it alone. I never could have." "That's what family is for, right?" she said, her eyes meeting his. A comfortable silence settled between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. For the first time since Clara's death, Alex felt the stirrings of a future he hadn't dared to imagine, one that might include more than just survival. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and a peaceful quiet had descended, Alex sat on his porch steps. Lily was asleep inside, safe in her own bed, in her own room, in a house that was now truly and irrevocably hers. Buster, the terrier, snoozed at his feet. The air was cool and smelled of freshly cut grass and charcoal smoke. He looked at the chipped paint on the window frame. It no longer looked like a mark of neglect. or a symbol of his struggle. Now it looked like a scar on a home that had been fought for, defended, and won. It was a reminder that the strongest walls aren't made of brick and mortar, but of love, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds of a brotherhood that would go to the ends of the earth for one of their own. He thought about Sterling and the colossal empty power he had wielded. The man had everything: money, influence, a tower that scraped the sky. But in the end, he had nothing. He was alone. Alex, in his small, humble house with its peeling paint and squeaky swing set, had everything that mattered. He had his daughter, he had his brothers, he had a community, he had a home. And as he sat there, watching the first stars begin to prick the deep velvet of the night sky, he knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man in the world.